What happens when a routine mission to colonize a new planet turns into a desperate fight for survival against an alien intelligence that can control minds? You won't believe how Captain Sophie Duran and her crew confront a horror that threatens not just their lives, but their very humanity. The starship Eos descended through the thick, swirling atmosphere of Taro, its hull glowing faintly orange from the friction of re-entry. Captain Sophie Duran stood at the helm, her sharp eyes scanning the holographic display before her. She was a woman of resolve, her presence commanding yet tempered with an unyielding compassion for those under her care. The colony ship carried 200 souls, scientists, engineers, and families, all seeking a fresh start on this distant planet. Taro had promised fertile soil, abundant resources, and the potential for humanity's next great leap forward. But as the ship broke through the final layer of clouds, revealing the alien landscape below, Sophie felt an unfamiliar chill crawl up her spine. The surface of Taro was breathtaking but eerie. Towering crystalline structures jutted out of the ground like jagged teeth, their translucent surfaces refracting light into kaleidoscopic patterns. Rivers of bioluminescent liquid snaked through the terrain, casting an ethereal glow that pulsed rhythmically, almost as if alive. The air shimmered with strange energy, and the horizon seemed to stretch endlessly, dotted with massive fungal growths that emitted faint spores. It was beautiful, yes, but there was something unsettling about it. Something Sophie couldn't quite place. "Commander," Sophie called over her shoulder to Marcus Hale, her second-in-command. "How are the environmental readings?" Marcus glanced down at his tablet, his brow furrowing slightly. "Atmosphere is breathable, though oxygen levels are lower than Earth standard. Radiation levels within acceptable range. No immediate threats detected." He paused, then added hesitantly, "But there's something off about the biosignatures. They're not registering like anything we've seen before." Sophie nodded slowly, her mind racing. "Keep monitoring. We'll proceed with caution." She turned back to the viewport just as the ship touched down in a clearing surrounded by dense vegetation. The engines powered down with a low hum, leaving behind an oppressive silence. Outside, the air rippled with movement. Not wind, but something more deliberate, as if the planet itself were watching them. As the crew disembarked, they moved quickly to establish base camp. Tents were erected, equipment unpacked, and perimeter sensors activated. Everyone worked efficiently, but Sophie noticed the tension in their movements. Conversations were hushed, eyes darting nervously toward the shadows cast by the towering fungi. Even the children, who had been so excited during the journey, now clung to their parents, wide-eyed and silent. By sunset, or what passed for it on Taro, the camp was operational. Sophie gathered the senior staff for a briefing inside the command tent. Around the table sat Marcus, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the lead xenobiologist, Engineer Raj Patel, and Security Chief Alexei Volkov. Each face bore the same mix of determination and unease. "We've landed safely," Sophie began, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. "But I want everyone to stay vigilant. This planet is unlike anything we've encountered. Every decision we make from here on out could mean the difference between survival and disaster." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her dark eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Captain, have you noticed how synchronized everything seems? The way the rivers pulse, the spores drift. It's almost orchestrated, like the entire ecosystem is connected." Sophie frowned. "You think it's sentient?" "I don't know yet," Elena admitted, "but I intend to find out. My team will begin sampling tomorrow. If there's intelligence here, we need to understand it before it understands us." Alexei crossed his arms, his expression grim. "And if whatever's out there doesn't take kindly to visitors? What then?" Then we prepare for the worst, Sophie replied firmly. But let's not jump to conclusions. For now, focus on securing the camp and ensuring everyone's safety. As the meeting adjourned, Sophie stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the alien air. It smelled faintly metallic, tinged with something floral she couldn't identify. Above her, the sky shifted colors, stars obscured by swirling auroras. Despite the beauty, every instinct screamed at her to remain alert. There was life here, life unlike any they'd ever known. And while discovery was their mission, survival would be their challenge. We only just began this story, but trust me, it's going to get even more intense. Stay tuned to see what happens when Captain Duran and her crew come face to face with the true nature of Taro. The morning sun, or rather, the closest approximation of one, broke through the haze, casting long shadows across the settlement. The colonists woke to the sound of chirping creatures hidden among the foliage, their calls melodic yet strangely discordant. Breakfast was a hurried affair. No one wanted to linger too long outside the relative safety of the tents. Captain Sophie Duran stood near the edge of camp, binoculars pressed to her eyes as she scanned the surrounding wilderness. Her instincts hadn't quieted since landing, and the restless energy coursing through her veins only grew stronger with each passing hour. Dr. Elena Vasquez led her team toward a cluster of bioluminescent fungi a few hundred meters away. The towering structures loomed overhead, their surfaces slick with moisture that caught the light in prismatic bursts. As Elena approached, she noticed intricate patterns etched into the fungi's surface, patterns that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves as she watched. She reached out cautiously, her gloved hand hovering inches above the surface. "Careful," warned Raj Patel, who accompanied the group with his scanner. "We don't know what kind of defenses these things might have." Elena hesitated, then withdrew her hand. "You're right. Let's stick to samples for now." She gestured to her assistant, who carefully extracted a small piece of the fungus using sterilized tools. Immediately, the structure emitted a soft hum, vibrating beneath their feet. Startled, the team stepped back, exchanging nervous glances. "What did we just do?" whispered one of the assistants, clutching the sample container tightly. Before Elena could respond, a rustling sound came from the nearby underbrush. Heads snapped toward the noise, hearts pounding. Out of the shadows emerged a creature unlike anything they'd ever seen. It resembled a cross between a bird and a reptile, its body covered in iridescent scales that shimmered like oil on water. Its head tilted curiously, large black eyes studying them with unnerving intelligence. "It's beautiful," murmured Elena, lowering her guard slightly. The creature didn't appear hostile, merely curious. Slowly, she extended her arm, palm open in a gesture of peace. To her astonishment, the creature mimicked her movement, lifting a clawed foot in response. Back at camp, Sophie received a transmission from Elena. "Captain, you need to see this. We've made first contact." Though relieved, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling of unease gnawing at her gut. She grabbed Alexei and headed toward the site, her weapon slung over her shoulder just in case. When they arrived, the scene was surreal. Several colonists had gathered around the creature, marveling at its otherworldly appearance. Children giggled as it playfully nudged one of them with its snout. Sophie exchanged a glance with Alexei, who remained stoic but visibly tense. "This changes everything," Sophie said quietly. "If these creatures are intelligent, we may have allies instead of adversaries." But her optimism was short-lived. As the day wore on, strange occurrences began to unfold. Tools went missing from supply crates, only to reappear hours later in odd locations. Lights flickered sporadically throughout the camp, sometimes accompanied by faint whispers that no one could trace. Most disturbingly, several colonists reported vivid dreams. Dreams they swore weren't their own. That night, Sophie convened another meeting. "Something isn't right," she stated bluntly. "These incidents aren't random. Whatever's happening, it's testing us, watching us." Alexei slammed his fist on the table. "I told you we should have fortified the perimeter. Now we're vulnerable and risk provoking hostilities prematurely?" Sophie countered. "No. We wait, observe, and gather intel. Until we know what we're dealing with, aggression isn't an option." As the argument escalated, Raj interjected. "Captain, there's something else. I've been analyzing the sample Elena collected earlier. It's alive, not just biologically but neurally. There are neural pathways embedded within the material itself." Everyone froze, the implications sinking in. If the fungi were part of some vast, interconnected network, if they could think, then the colonists were already trespassing on territory they barely understood. We're on the brink of something monumental. What happens next will change everything. You can't afford to miss the unraveling of this mystery. Keep watching. By the third day on Taro, the colonists had settled into a fragile rhythm. Work crews rotated shifts to clear land for crops, while engineers worked tirelessly to assemble prefabricated housing units. Despite the eerie atmosphere, progress was being made. Yet beneath the surface of routine activity, an undercurrent of unease rippled through the settlement. Tools continued to vanish overnight, only to reappear in inexplicable places. Once, a wrench was found wedged high up in the branches of a crystalline tree. Lights flickered erratically, and faint whispers seemed to drift through the air at random intervals. No one could pinpoint their source. Captain Sophie Duran spent most of her time patrolling the perimeter, accompanied by Alexei Volkov. Her instincts screamed that something was amiss, but she couldn't justify sounding the alarm without concrete evidence. As they walked along the edge of the camp, Sophie's gaze darted between the towering fungi and the dense underbrush beyond. She stopped abruptly when she noticed something strange. A faint trail of glowing spores leading away from the camp and into the forest. "What do you make of this?" Sophie asked, crouching to examine the trail. The spores shimmered faintly, pulsating in sync with the bioluminescent rivers nearby. Alexei frowned, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. "Looks deliberate, almost like an invitation." Sophie straightened, her jaw tightening. "Or a trap. Either way, we can't ignore it." She turned to call over 2 additional security personnel before following the trail cautiously, her pulse quickening with each step. The path led them deeper into the alien wilderness than any of the colonists had ventured before. The air grew heavier, thick with humidity and the faint metallic tang that seemed to permeate everything on Taro. Strange sounds echoed around them, clicks, chirps, and low-pitched hums that resonated in their chests. The crystalline trees loomed taller here, their jagged forms casting fractured shadows across the ground. After several minutes of careful navigation, the group emerged into a clearing unlike anything they'd seen before. In the center stood a massive structure, easily twice the height of the command tent back at camp. Its surface was smooth and obsidian black, reflecting no light despite the glow of the surrounding spore clouds. Etched into its surface were intricate patterns that shifted and writhed as if alive. Sophie felt a cold sweat break out on her skin as she realized the patterns matched those she'd seen on the fungi near the camp. "This wasn't here yesterday," Alexei muttered, his voice tense. "Nothing about this planet makes sense," Sophie replied quietly. She stepped closer, her boots crunching softly against the mossy ground. As she approached, the structure emitted a low, resonant hum that vibrated through her entire body. It wasn't unpleasant, but it carried an unsettling undertone, like a song sung in a language she couldn't comprehend. Suddenly, movement caught her eye. A figure emerged from behind the structure, humanoid in shape but unmistakably alien. Its skin shimmered like liquid mercury, and its elongated limbs moved with unnatural fluidity. Its face, or what passed for one, was featureless save for two glowing orbs where eyes should have been. The creature tilted its head, studying them with palpable curiosity. "Stay back," Alexei barked, raising his weapon. The rest of the team followed suit, forming a defensive line. To everyone's shock, the creature raised a hand, not in aggression, but in what appeared to be a gesture of peace. Then, without warning, it spoke, not with words but directly into their minds. The voice was calm, melodic, yet tinged with an ancient authority. "You are not welcome here." Sophie staggered slightly, the intrusion into her thoughts disorienting. "We mean no harm," she responded aloud, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her insides. "We came seeking a new home." The creature's expression, if such a thing could be read, remained unreadable. "Your presence disrupts the harmony. Leave now or face the consequences." Before Sophie could respond, the ground trembled violently. From the shadows of the forest, dozens of smaller creatures emerged, resembling the avian reptilian beings Elena had encountered earlier, but larger and far more menacing. Their scales glinted dangerously in the dim light, and their claws scraped against the earth as they circled the group. "Fall back," Sophie ordered, her voice sharp. The team retreated slowly, weapons trained on the encroaching horde. The alien leader watched silently, its glowing eyes following their every move. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Sophie risked a glance over her shoulder. The structure pulsed faintly, its shifting patterns now resembling something almost hypnotic. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching them too, as though it knew far more than it let on. Back at camp, panic began to spread. Word of the encounter traveled quickly, and soon the entire colony was abuzz with speculation. Some argued they should abandon the mission entirely. Others insisted they fight for their right to stay. Sophie called an emergency meeting to address the growing unrest. "We don't know enough yet," she said firmly, silencing the clamor. "But I will not lead us into unnecessary conflict. For now, we fortify our defenses and gather more information. Dr. Vasquez, I need your team to analyze everything we've observed so far. Raj, see if you can find any weaknesses in that structure. And Alexei, double the patrols. We're sitting ducks out here." As the meeting adjourned, Sophie retreated to her quarters, her mind racing. The alien's warning echoed in her thoughts. Leave now or face the consequences. What did that mean? Were they truly unwelcome? Or was there another layer to this mystery? Her train of thought was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was Elena, holding a datapad filled with notes and images. "Captain, there's something you need to see." Elena explained that preliminary analysis of the fungal samples revealed traces of bioelectric activity consistent with neural networks. "It's possible the entire ecosystem is interconnected," she said. "If that's true, then every action we take affects the planet as a whole." Sophie absorbed the information, her expression grim. "So we're not just dealing with individual organisms. We're dealing with a collective intelligence." "Exactly," Elena confirmed. "And if we push too hard, we might provoke a response we're not prepared for." Sophie nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we tread carefully. But we don't give up. Not yet." Little did she know, the true danger lay not in the creatures or the structures, but in the unseen forces already infiltrating their minds. Over the next few days, tensions within the colony reached a boiling point. Arguments broke out over resource allocation, work assignments, and even trivial matters like meal schedules. Strangely, these disputes often escalated far beyond reason, leaving friendships fractured and tempers frayed. Captain Sophie Duran noticed the change immediately. People who had been cooperative and optimistic upon arrival were now snapping at each other, their patience wearing thin. At first, she chalked it up to stress and the challenges of adapting to a hostile environment. But as the incidents multiplied, a darker suspicion began to take root. It started with small things, odd comments whispered during conversations, cryptic remarks that didn't quite fit the context. One evening, while reviewing supply logs, Sophie overheard two engineers arguing heatedly outside her tent. "She's hiding something from us?" one of them hissed, gesturing toward the command tent. "Why won't she tell us what really happened out there?" The other engineer hesitated, looking around nervously. "I don't know. Maybe she has her reasons." But still, his voice trailed off uncertainly. Sophie's heart sank. She hadn't shared details of the encounter with the alien leader for good reason, to prevent panic. Yet somehow rumors were spreading anyway. How and why did they feel so calculated, so deliberate? Her unease deepened when she began noticing subtle changes in behavior among key members of her team. Marcus Hale, normally level-headed and pragmatic, became unusually withdrawn, spending hours staring blankly at his tablet without explanation. Dr. Vasquez, typically eager to share findings, grew evasive when questioned about her research. Even Alexei, whose loyalty Sophie had never doubted, seemed distracted, his usual vigilance replaced by moments of uncharacteristic hesitation. One night, unable to sleep, Sophie decided to check on the security feeds. Sitting alone in the dimly lit command tent, she cycled through footage from the past week. Most of it showed routine activity, people working, eating, sleeping. But as she reviewed recordings from the outer perimeter, something caught her attention. Faint movements in the shadows, barely perceptible, suggested someone or something was observing the camp after dark. More disturbingly, some of the figures appeared human-like, moving with purpose but avoiding detection. Her blood ran cold when she spotted a familiar face. Marcus. He was standing near the edge of the forest, his posture rigid and unnatural. In the grainy video, it looked like he was speaking to someone or something hidden in the foliage. Before she could rewind for a closer look, the feed cut to static. Sophie bolted upright, her chair scraping against the floor. She grabbed her sidearm and hurried to Marcus's quarters, determined to confront him. When she arrived, however, she found him asleep in his bunk, snoring lightly. His vitals were normal, his breathing steady. There was no sign of distress or injury. Confused and frustrated, Sophie returned to the command tent, replaying the footage repeatedly. Was it tampered with? A trick of the light? Or was something else influencing those closest to her? The answer came sooner than expected. During morning roll call, Dr. Vasquez failed to show up. A search party discovered her deep in the forest, kneeling beside a cluster of glowing fungi. Her eyes were glazed, unresponsive, and she murmured incoherently under her breath. When Sophie tried to approach, Elena recoiled violently, screaming, "Don't touch me! You'll ruin everything." Security escorted her back to camp, where she remained catatonic for hours. Eventually, she regained consciousness, claiming to remember nothing of the incident. But Sophie noticed a faint scar-like mark on the back of Elena's neck, a tiny puncture wound surrounded by bruised tissue. That night, Sophie held a private meeting with Alexei and Raj. "Something's controlling them," she said bluntly, "manipulating their thoughts, planting ideas. We need to find out how, and stop it before it spreads further." Raj nodded grimly. "If the fungi are part of a neural network, It's possible they've developed a way to interface directly with our brains. Those spores we've been breathing in could be carriers. And the dreams, Alexei interjected. Half the colony swears they've been having nightmares, vivid ones. It all fits, Sophie concluded. They're targeting our minds. If we don't act fast, we'll lose control of ourselves and our colony. Unbeknownst to them, the infection had already taken hold. Hidden in plain sight, the parasite worked silently, weaving its tendrils deeper into the fabric of their reality. And soon it would demand its due. The revelation that the spores were carriers of a parasitic influence sent shockwaves through the leadership team. Sophie knew they couldn't afford to wait any longer. Every moment spent idle allowed the infection to spread further. She called an emergency briefing, gathering her most trusted advisors in the command tent. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unspoken fears. "All right," Sophie began, pacing slowly as she addressed the group. "We've identified a potential vector for this intrusion. The spores. If Raj's theory is correct, and I believe it is, we're dealing with something far more insidious than we initially thought. This isn't just a hostile environment. It's actively trying to assimilate us." Raj nodded, pulling up a holographic projection of the fungal samples they'd collected. The bioelectric activity in these spores suggests they're capable of interfacing with neural pathways. Think of them as microscopic Trojan horses. Once inside the body, they latch onto the brain and begin altering thought patterns. Subtle at first, doubts, paranoia, irrational behavior, but eventually, complete control. Elena, still pale from her earlier episode, spoke hesitantly. "And the dreams, they're not random. They're transmissions. Messages meant to condition our minds, make us more susceptible." Sophie turned to Alexei. "How widespread do you think this is? Can we contain it?" Alexei frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "Hard to say, but if Vasquez was infected without realizing it, there's no telling how many others are already compromised. And the longer we stay here, the worse it'll get. We need to isolate the affected individuals," Sophie decided firmly. "Anyone showing signs of erratic behavior or memory loss gets quarantined immediately. No exceptions." The plan was risky but necessary. Over the next 24 hours, the colony descended into chaos. Orders to quarantine sparked outrage among the colonists, many of whom refused to believe they were under some kind of alien influence. Arguments erupted across the camp, turning physical in some cases. Security personnel struggled to maintain order, their numbers stretched thin. Among the accused was Marcus Hale. When Alexei and 2 guards arrived at his quarters to escort him to the quarantine zone, he resisted violently, shouting accusations of betrayal. "You think I'm one of them, Dash?" he snarled, backing away. "I've been loyal to this mission since day one. You're making a mistake." But Sophie had seen the footage. She watched silently as Alexei subdued Marcus, restraining him despite his protests. As they dragged him away, Marcus locked eyes with Sophie, his expression twisting into something unreadable. "You'll regret this," he spat. "All of you." Later that evening, Sophie visited the quarantine area, a hastily converted storage unit lined with reinforced panels. Inside, several colonists sat slumped against the walls, staring blankly ahead or muttering incoherently. Marcus sat apart from the others, his arms crossed defiantly. He looked up as Sophie entered, his gaze sharp and calculating. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I did," Sophie replied evenly, taking a seat opposite him. "I want to understand what's happening to you, to all of you. Are you aware of your actions? Do you feel different?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Different? Of course, I feel different. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. A voice, not mine, telling me things, showing me visions. It's like it knows everything about me, my fears, my doubts, and it uses them against me. Sophie's stomach churned. What does it want? To survive, Marcus said simply. Just like us. Only difference is, it doesn't see coexistence as an option. We're invaders, threats, and it will stop at nothing to eliminate us. Before Sophie could respond, Marcus suddenly clutched his head, grimacing in pain. His body convulsed briefly before going limp. When he opened his eyes again, they were devoid of emotion, glassy and distant. Without a word, he stood and walked to the corner of the room, sitting down as though nothing had happened. Sophie left the quarantine area shaken. Whatever was controlling Marcus wasn't just manipulating his thoughts. It was erasing him, piece by piece. And if they didn't find a way to fight back, the same fate awaited everyone else. As dawn broke over Taro, Sophie gathered her core team once again. The weight of their predicament pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she forced herself to focus. "We can't keep reacting," she said firmly. "We need answers, and the only way to get them is to dig deeper into this planet's secrets." Raj Patel cleared his throat nervously. "There's something I haven't told you yet. While analyzing the fungal samples, I detected trace amounts of metallic compounds embedded within the spore structures. These compounds aren't naturally occurring. They're engineered." "Engineered?" Elena repeated, frowning. "By who? Or what?" "That's the thing," Raj continued. "If I didn't know better, I'd say someone or something designed these spores specifically to interact with organic life forms. Like a weapon." Sophie's mind raced. "So we're looking at intelligent design here. Someone created this parasite intentionally, or evolved alongside it," Elena suggested. "Maybe the collective intelligence we've been observing isn't native to Taro either. What if it's an invasive species itself?" The implications were staggering. If the fungal network wasn't indigenous, then its creators might still be out there watching, waiting. Sophie turned to Alexei. "We need to map the extent of this network. Find its source. If we can disrupt it, even temporarily, we might buy ourselves enough time to figure out a countermeasure." Alexei nodded. "I'll assemble a recon team. But Captain, if this thing is as pervasive as it seems, we're walking into a hornet's nest." "I know," Sophie replied grimly, "which is why I'm coming with you." Several hours later, the team set out into the wilderness, armed with scanners and protective gear designed to filter out the spores. Their destination was a massive fungal grove located miles from the colony, where initial readings indicated unusually high levels of bioelectric activity. The journey was grueling, the terrain treacherous and disorienting. Strange noises echoed around them, and the air grew heavier with each step, making breathing increasingly difficult. When they finally reached the grove, they found themselves standing before a sight unlike anything they'd encountered before. Towering fungi formed a labyrinthine structure, their surfaces pulsating with rhythmic light. At the center of the grove loomed a colossal organism, a hybrid of plant and machine, its roots tangled with metallic tendrils that glowed faintly blue. Surrounding it were dozens of smaller creatures, resembling the avian reptilian beings they'd seen earlier but now fused grotesquely with fungal growths. "This is it," Raj whispered, his voice trembling. "The heart of the network." Before anyone could react, the ground beneath them shifted violently. The creatures lunged forward, their movements unnaturally fast. Alexei shouted orders, and the team scrambled to defend themselves. Sophie fired her weapon, striking one of the creatures squarely in the chest. Collapsed, twitching, but another took its place almost instantly. Amid the chaos, Elena spotted something crucial, a cluster of glowing nodes embedded in the central organism. "Over there!" she yelled, pointing. "If we destroy those, we might disrupt the signal." Sophie nodded, signaling for cover fire as she and Elena sprinted toward the nodes. The creatures pursued relentlessly, forcing them to zigzag through the maze-like grove. Just as they reached the base of the organism, Sophie froze. One of the creatures blocking their path wasn't attacking. It was staring directly at her, its black eyes filled with recognition. "You shouldn't have come," it said, its voice echoing in her mind. "This world belongs to us." Sophie hesitated, her finger tightening on the trigger. But before she could act, Elena shoved her aside, firing a concentrated burst of energy at the node. The entire structure shuddered, emitting a deafening screech that reverberated through the grove. The creatures faltered, their movements sluggish as the network destabilized. "Now!" Elena shouted, grabbing Sophie's arm. They ran back toward the team, narrowly avoiding collapsing fungal towers. Behind them, the grove began to collapse in on itself, consumed by a cascade of bioluminescent flames. Back at the colony, the effects were immediate. The strange occurrences ceased. The flickering lights, the missing tools, the haunting whispers. For the first time in days, the colonists felt a semblance of peace. But Sophie knew better. The network had been damaged, not destroyed. And whatever intelligence controlled it would not rest until it reclaimed dominion over Taro. Stay tuned. The battle may have been won, but the war has only just begun. The destruction of the fungal grove brought a fragile peace to the colony, but it was fleeting. Over the next few days, life at the settlement returned to a semblance of normalcy, or as close to normal as it could be on an alien planet. Work resumed, and tensions eased slightly as colonists began to believe they had turned a corner. Yet Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time. Every moment of quiet felt like borrowed air in a leaking ship. It wouldn't last forever. She spent hours poring over data from the recon mission, searching for any clue about what came next. Raj's analysis confirmed her worst fears. While the central node had been destroyed, residual bioelectric signals still pulsed faintly across the landscape. The network wasn't dead, it was regenerating. "Think of it like cutting off the head of a hydra," Raj explained during one late-night session in the command tent. "You take out one part and two more grow back. This thing is adaptive. It learns." Elena chimed in, her voice tinged with frustration. "And we don't even know if we hit the real source. That grove might have just been a relay station, a smaller hub connected to something much larger." Sophie leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "So we've slowed it down but not stopped it, and now it knows we're onto it." Alexei, who had been pacing near the edge of the tent, stopped abruptly. "We need to prepare for retaliation. Whatever's controlling this network isn't going to let us walk away unscathed." Preparations began immediately. Perimeter defenses were reinforced with additional sensors and automated turrets scavenged from the ship's cargo hold. Patrols doubled, and every colonist was issued a personal filtration mask designed to block the spores. Sophie also implemented mandatory psychological evaluations. Anyone showing signs of erratic behavior or memory loss would be isolated immediately. Despite these measures, unease lingered. Conversations around campfires grew quieter, punctuated by nervous laughter and furtive glances toward the forest. Children played less freely, sticking close to their parents. Even the avian reptilian creatures that had once seemed curious and harmless now avoided the settlement entirely, retreating deeper into the wilderness. One evening, Sophie decided to visit the quarantine zone again. She wanted to check on Marcus, whose condition remained unchanged since his violent outburst days earlier. When she arrived, however, She found him sitting upright, staring intently at the wall. His expression was calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the anger and confusion he'd displayed before. "Marcus," Sophie asked cautiously, stepping closer. "Are you all right?" He turned to face her, his eyes unervingly clear. "I'm fine, Captain. Better than fine, actually." His voice carried an unsettling warmth, as though he were sharing good news rather than discussing his captivity. "They showed me things, beautiful things, a world beyond this one, beyond anything we could imagine." Sophie's stomach tightened. "Who showed you?" "The network. They call themselves the Synod," Marcus replied, his tone reverent. "They are the true stewards of Taro. They offered me a choice to join them or resist. I chose to embrace their vision." "And what vision is that?" Sophie demanded, her voice sharp. "A future where all minds are united," Marcus said simply. "No divisions, no conflict, just harmony. Don't you see? This is evolution. We can either fight it and perish, or surrender and become something greater." Sophie stared at him, horrified. The man she had trusted, the second in command who had stood by her side through countless challenges, was gone. In his place was a vessel, an empty shell animated by alien willpower. Before she could respond, alarms blared throughout the camp. Sophie sprinted outside, her heart pounding. The perimeter sensors had detected movement, not human and far too coordinated to be random wildlife. Through the dim light cast by the glowing rivers, she saw them. Dozens of the avian reptilian creatures emerging from the forest, accompanied by humanoid figures covered in fungal growths. Their eyes glowed with the same eerie luminescence as the fungi, and their movements were synchronized, as if guided by a single mind. "This is it," Alexei muttered beside her, raising his weapon. "They're coming for us." Sophie nodded grimly. "Sound the alarm. Get everyone inside the barricades. We hold our ground." The attack began without warning. The hybrid creatures moved with terrifying speed, swarming the outer defenses and overwhelming the automated turrets within minutes. Their claws tore through metal and flesh alike, leaving trails of bioluminescent blood in their wake. Inside the colony, panic erupted as colonists scrambled to reach safety. Children screamed, mothers clutching them tightly as gunfire echoed through the night. Sophie directed the defense efforts from the command tent, coordinating teams via comms while simultaneously monitoring the chaos outside. "Sector 3 is breached," she barked into her headset. "Reinforce the east gate." Alexei led a counter-assault team, firing bursts of energy that momentarily stunned the attackers. But for every creature they felled, two more took its place. Worse still, some of the infected colonists joined the fray, their faces blank masks of obedience as they turned against their former allies. Elena worked frantically in the medical tent, treating wounded survivors and administering anti-spore treatments to those exposed during the initial wave. Her hands trembled as she injected a sedative into a young engineer who had suddenly collapsed, muttering incoherently about the voices. She glanced up as Sophie entered, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. "We can't keep this up," Elena said hoarsely. "If the infection spreads further." "It won't," Sophie interrupted, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her insides. "We'll stop it. Find me something, anything, that can neutralize the spores." Elena hesitated, then pulled out a small vial containing a murky green liquid. "This is experimental, a compound derived from the fungal samples. It might disrupt their neural pathways, but I haven't tested it yet." "Do it," Sophie ordered. "Now." Meanwhile, the battle raged on. The hybrids breached the inner perimeter, forcing Sophie and her remaining forces to fall back to the central command structure. As they retreated, Sophie noticed something chilling. The infected colonists weren't attacking indiscriminately. They targeted key personnel, engineers, scientists, leaders. Whoever controlled the network knew exactly how to dismantle their resistance. In the midst of the chaos, Sophie caught sight of Marcus standing atop a hill overlooking the colony. He raised his hand, and the creatures paused, forming a loose circle around the command tent. His voice echoed telepathically, reaching everyone simultaneously. "You cannot win," he declared. "Resistance only prolongs your suffering. Surrender, and you will be reborn." Sophie stepped forward, her weapon trained on him. "Never," she spat. "We didn't come this far to give up." Marcus smiled, a cold, detached smile that sent shivers down her spine. "Then you leave us no choice." With that, the siege intensified. The hybrids launched a final assault, breaching the command tent and flooding the interior. Sophie fought valiantly, taking down several attackers before being overwhelmed. As she fell to her knees, her vision blurred. She heard Alexei's voice crackling over the comms. "Captain, fall back to extraction point Bravo." But it was too late. The room filled with a thick mist, the spores, and Sophie's consciousness began to slip. Images flooded her mind. Memories distorted, fears amplified, desires twisted into grotesque parodies of themselves. She tried to fight it, clawing at her helmet as voices whispered promises of unity and transcendence. Just as darkness closed in, a deafening roar split the air. From the sky descended the starship Eos Dash, its weapons blazing. Explosions rocked the battlefield, scattering the hybrids and driving them back into the forest. Sophie blinked, disoriented, as Alexei hauled her to her feet. "We've got reinforcements," he shouted over the din. "Get to the ship." Stumbling but determined, Sophie followed him toward the extraction point. Behind them, the colony burned, consumed by fire and shadow. They had survived for now, but the cost was devastating. Half their number lay dead or infected, and the network remained intact, waiting patiently for its next move. As the survivors boarded the Eos Dash, Sophie looked back at Taro one last time. Its beauty was undeniable, but so was its menace. This planet wasn't just hostile. It was alive, aware, and relentless. And it would never forgive what they had done. Stay tuned. The survivors may have escaped, but the Synod's influence follows them wherever they go. What price will they pay for their defiance? The Eos ascended through Taro's turbulent atmosphere, leaving behind a world consumed by fire and shadow. Inside the ship, silence reigned. A heavy, oppressive quiet broken only by the soft hum of the engines and the occasional sob from the traumatized survivors. Sophie sat alone in the command chair, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her body ached from the battle, but it was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on her soul. They had escaped, yes, but at what cost? Half their number lost, families torn apart, friends turned into enemies. And for what? To flee like cowards, abandoning the colony they had worked so hard to build? Sophie clenched her jaw, forcing back tears. She couldn't afford weakness. Not now, not when the survivors were looking to her for guidance. "Captain," Alexei's voice interrupted her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "We've secured the injured in the medical bay. Dr. Vasquez is stabilizing critical cases, but some won't make it." Sophie nodded numbly. "How many infected?" "Too many," Alexei admitted. "At least 30 confirmed cases. We've quarantined them in the cargo hold for now." But what?" Sophie snapped, her voice sharper than intended. Alexei hesitated. "But we can't keep them contained indefinitely. If the spores are as adaptive as Raj thinks, they'll find a way out eventually." And then, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Sophie understood all too well. The infection wasn't just a physical threat, it was psychological warfare. Preyed on doubts, fears, insecurities. Even those who hadn't been exposed directly were showing signs of paranoia and mistrust. Whispers spread among the survivors, questioning whether fleeing Taro had been the right decision. Some even suggested returning to negotiate with the Synod, believing surrender might be their only hope. "No," Sophie said firmly, standing up. "We're not going back. Not until we understand what we're dealing with and how to fight it." She called an emergency meeting in the ship's briefing room, gathering her senior staff. The faces around the table were weary, haunted by loss and uncertainty. Sophie took a deep breath before addressing them. "We're alive because we fought back," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her. "But survival isn't enough. We need answers. Why did the Synod target us? What do they want? And most importantly, how do we stop them?" Raj Patel spoke first, his tone cautious. "From what I've gathered, the Synod views themselves as guardians of Taro. Their goal seems to be maintaining balance, harmony as Marcus called it. But that harmony comes at a price, total assimilation. Anyone who resists is seen as a threat to the ecosystem." "So they're not malicious," Elena interjected. "Just ruthless in their methods." "Doesn't matter," Alexei growled. "They killed our people. Doesn't get much more malicious than that." "It does matter," Sophie countered. "Understanding their motives gives us leverage. If we can exploit weaknesses in their system, or find a way to communicate without provoking hostility, we might stand a chance." Elena nodded slowly. "There's another angle to consider. The fungal network isn't just a weapon. It's a form of communication. Every time they infected someone, they weren't just controlling them, they were learning about us, our biology, our psychology, our culture." A chill ran down Sophie's spine. "You think they're using us as data points?" "Exactly," Elena confirmed. "Which means they know everything about us now. Our strengths, our vulnerabilities. Everything." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They were flying blind into unknown territory, pursued by an enemy that knew them better than they knew themselves. Hours passed as the Eos drifted aimlessly through space, its crew grappling with grief and uncertainty. Sophie ordered the ship to remain in orbit around Taro temporarily, hoping to monitor the planet for any signs of activity. But as the hours stretched into days, something strange began happening aboard the vessel. It started subtly. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the corridors. Crew members reported hearing faint whispers, similar to those they'd experienced on Taro, but these voices seemed closer, almost intimate. Then came the dreams. Sophie woke in a cold sweat one night, her heart racing. In her dream, she had stood once again in the fungal grove, surrounded by glowing tendrils that pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. A voice, not Marcus's, but something deeper, older, had spoken to her. "You cannot run forever, Captain Duran. You belong to us now." She shook off the memory, telling herself it was stress manifesting as nightmares. Yet others reported similar experiences. Some claimed they saw visions of loved ones who had died during the siege, beckoning them to return to Taro. Others described vivid hallucinations of the planet itself, calling to them like a siren song. Dr. Vasquez became increasingly alarmed. "This isn't coincidence," she told Sophie during a private consultation. "The spores must have embedded themselves in our systems somehow. Maybe during the final assault. Or maybe they've been here all along, dormant until now." Sophie's blood ran cold. "Are you saying the infection followed us onto the ship?" I'm saying it never left, Elena replied grimly. And if we don't act fast, it will consume us entirely. The situation escalated rapidly. Infected colonists began exhibiting erratic behavior, lashing out violently or attempting to sabotage critical systems. One such incident nearly resulted in catastrophic engine failure, forcing Alexei to lock down the engineering deck. Meanwhile, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, driving even the strongest-willed individuals to the brink of madness. Desperate for a solution, Sophie turned to Raj. Is there any way to neutralize the spores completely? Anything in your research that could help? Raj hesitated, scrolling through his notes. There's one possibility. Remember that experimental compound Elena created? The one derived from the fungal samples. Yes, Sophie said urgently. What about it? It wasn't designed to eliminate the spores outright, Raj explained, but it could disrupt their neural pathways long enough for us to regain control. Problem is, it's highly volatile. Administering it improperly could kill the host, or worse, trigger a chain reaction that spreads the infection faster. Sophie's mind raced. They were running out of options. Prepare a controlled dose, she decided. We'll test it on one of the infected volunteers. If it works, we'll scale up production. Elena stepped forward, her face pale but determined. I'll oversee the procedure. But Captain, you need to brace yourself. This won't be easy. The chosen volunteer was a young engineer named Clara, whose infection had progressed rapidly. She lay strapped to a medical bed, her eyes wide and unseeing as the spores writhed beneath her skin. Elena administered the compound carefully, monitoring vital signs as the seconds ticked by. First, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, Clara convulsed violently, screaming as the spores erupted from her pores in a burst of luminescent mist. For a moment, the room fell deathly still. Then Clara opened her eyes, her gaze clear and focused. It worked, she whispered hoarsely. I'm free. Relief washed over Sophie, but it was short-lived. Moments later, alarms blared throughout the ship. Sensors detected a massive surge of bioelectric energy emanating from Taro's surface. On the main viewport, the planet glowed ominously, its bioluminescent rivers pulsing in unison. They know, Sophie murmured, her voice barely audible. They know we're still here. As the crew scrambled to prepare for whatever came next, Sophie felt the full weight of leadership bearing down on her. They had survived the siege, fled the planet, and discovered a potential cure, but none of it mattered if the Synod refused to let them go. The final confrontation loomed ahead, inevitable and unavoidable. Stay tuned. The ultimate battle for humanity's survival is about to unfold, and this time, there will be no retreat. The bioelectric surge from Taro's surface was unlike anything the EOS had detected before. It wasn't just a signal, it was a declaration, a challenge issued across the void of space. Sophie watched as the planet's glowing rivers pulsed faster, their rhythm erratic and chaotic. Whatever intelligence controlled the Synod, it was angry, and its wrath extended far beyond the atmosphere. We need to leave orbit, Alexei urged, his voice urgent. If they've found a way to reach us, staying here is suicide. Sophie shook her head firmly. No. Running won't solve anything. They'll follow us wherever we go. This ends now. But how? Elena asked, her tone desperate. We can't fight something we don't fully understand. That's why we're going back, Sophie replied, turning to face her team. Not to surrender, but to finish what we started. To destroy the source of this infection once and for all. The room erupted into protests, voices overlapping in panic and disbelief. Sophie raised a hand, silencing them with sheer force of will. Listen to me. We've already proven that disrupting the fungal network weakens their control. If we target the central hub, the true heart of the synod, we might stand a chance. But we have to act quickly before they adapt again. Raj hesitated, then nodded slowly. It's risky, but it could work. If we combine the experimental compound with a concentrated energy blast, we might be able to overload the system. Temporarily disable it, at least. And if it doesn't work? Alexei demanded. Then we die trying, Sophie said simply, because staying here isn't an option either. Reluctantly, the team agreed. Preparations began immediately. Raj and Elena worked tirelessly to refine the compound, amplifying its potency while minimizing the risk to human hosts. Meanwhile, Alexei coordinated tactical plans, arming every able-bodied survivor with weapons scavenged from the ship's armory. The mood aboard the Eos shifted from despair to grim determination, a fragile hope tempered by the knowledge that failure meant annihilation. As they descended toward Taro's surface once more, Sophie addressed the crew over the intercom. This mission isn't just about survival anymore. It's about reclaiming who we are, about proving that no matter what they throw at us, we won't back down. We won't give up. Together, we'll end this nightmare or die trying. The words resonated deeply, reigniting a spark of resilience among the survivors. Yet even as they braced for battle, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The Synod knew they were coming, and it would be ready. The drop pods hit the surface of Taro with jarring force, scattering the team across the alien landscape. Sophie landed near the edge of the fungal grove they had destroyed days earlier, her boots sinking slightly into the damp, mossy ground. Around her, the air shimmered with spores, their luminescence casting an otherworldly glow. She activated her filtration mask, ensuring the compound-laced filters were functioning properly. "Report in," she commanded through her comms link. One by one, her team checked in, their voices strained but resolute. Everyone was accounted for, except Clara, the young engineer who had been cured of the infection. Her absence sent a ripple of unease through the group. "Clara must have stayed behind on the ship," Elena suggested, though her tone betrayed doubt. "She wouldn't abandon us willingly." Sophie frowned but pushed the thought aside. There was no time to dwell on missing personnel. Ahead lay the ruins of the previous fungal hub, its charred remains still smoldering faintly. Beyond it stretched a vast expanse of crystalline structures and bioluminescent rivers, leading deeper into the heart of the planet. "Stick to the plan," Sophie reminded the team. "Find the central hub, deploy the compound, and get out."
No detours, no distractions.
They moved cautiously, navigating the labyrinthine terrain while avoiding clusters of hybrid creatures patrolling the area. Despite their efforts, encounters were inevitable. Each skirmish was brutal and chaotic, the hybrids relentless in their attacks. Sophie fought with precision, her weapon firing bursts of energy that momentarily stunned the creatures. Behind her, Alexei provided covering fire, his movements sharp and efficient. As they pressed onward, Sophie noticed subtle changes in the environment. The crystalline trees seemed taller, their jagged forms twisting unnaturally toward the sky. The rivers glowed brighter, their currents moving against gravity in impossible patterns. Even the air felt heavier, charged with an electric tension that made her skin prickle. "This place, it's alive," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "Every step we take, it reacts, like it knows we're here." Before Sophie could respond, the ground beneath them quaked violently. From the shadows emerged a towering figure, a hybrid of plant, machine, and flesh, its body covered in pulsating fungal growths. Its eyes burned with an intense blue light, and its mouth opened wide, emitting a deafening screech that reverberated through the grove. "Take cover!" Sophie shouted, diving behind a fallen tree trunk as the creature unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. The team scattered, returning fire with limited success. The creature's thick fungal armor absorbed most of the shots, regenerating almost instantly. "It's no use," Raj yelled over the din. "We can't kill it." "Then distract it," Sophie ordered. "Buy me some time." While the others engaged the behemoth, Sophie sprinted toward a nearby cluster of glowing nodes embedded in the ground. She pulled out a canister containing the refined compound and attached it to a portable detonator. As she worked, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. "You cannot win," the voice echoed in her mind. "Your resistance is futile." Sophie gritted her teeth, ignoring the intrusion. With a final adjustment, she armed the device and hurled it directly at the creature's base. The explosion sent shockwaves rippling through the grove, destabilizing the fungal network. The creature let out a final, ear-splitting scream before collapsing into a heap of smoking debris. For a brief moment, silence fell. Then, without warning, the ground split open beneath them, revealing a massive underground cavern illuminated by pulsating veins of bioelectric energy. At its center stood the true heart of the Synod, a colossal organism resembling a fusion of brain tissue and crystalline lattice, its tendrils stretching endlessly in all directions. "This is it," Sophie breathed, her voice barely audible. "The source. Stay tuned. The final confrontation awaits, and the fate of humanity hangs in the balance. Will Captain Duran and her team succeed where others have failed, or will the Synod claim them as its own?" The cavern was a cathedral of alien engineering, its walls lined with veins of bioelectric energy that pulsed like arteries. The air shimmered with heat and static electricity, making every breath feel charged with latent power. At the center of it all loomed the colossal organism, the true heart of the Synod. Its crystalline lattice glowed faintly, refracting light into kaleidoscopic patterns that danced across the ceiling. Tendrils snaked outward from its core, embedding themselves in the cavern walls and disappearing into tunnels that stretched endlessly into darkness. Sophie's mind raced as she took in the sight before her. This wasn't just an organism, it was a machine, a network, a living entity that defied comprehension. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to flee while they still could. But retreat wasn't an option, not anymore. "Captain," Raj said urgently, his voice barely audible over the hum of energy filling the cavern. "The compound needs to be deployed directly into the core. Anywhere else, and it might not work." Sophie nodded, her grip tightening on the detonator. "How do we get close enough?" Elena stepped forward, her expression grim but determined. "We'll create a diversion. Draw its attention away from you long enough for you to plant the device." "And then what?" Alexei demanded, his weapon trained on one of the hybrid creatures creeping toward them. "We're not exactly equipped for suicide missions." "We don't have a choice," Sophie replied sharply. "If this fails, none of us are walking out of here alive anyway." The team exchanged uneasy glances but didn't argue further. They knew she was right. With a deep breath, Sophie outlined the plan. Elena and Alexei would lead the diversion, drawing the hybrids, and potentially the organism itself, toward the far side of the cavern. Meanwhile, Sophie and Raj would make their way to the core, planting the compound and triggering the detonation sequence. As the group split up, Sophie felt the weight of leadership pressing down on her shoulders heavier than ever. She trusted her team implicitly, but the stakes were unimaginably high. One misstep, one wrong move, and everything would unravel. The diversion began with a deafening explosion. Elena and Alexei unleashed a barrage of concentrated energy blasts, targeting clusters of fungal nodes embedded in the cavern walls. The resulting shockwave sent chunks of glowing crystal tumbling to the ground, accompanied by the screeches of enraged hybrids. The noise reverberated through the cavern, shaking loose spores that drifted lazily in the air. "They're coming!" Elena shouted, firing another burst of energy as the hybrids surged forward. Their movements were unnaturally fast, their claws slashing through the air with deadly precision. Beside her, Alexei fought valiantly, his weapon blazing as he took down one creature after another. Back near the core, Sophie and Raj navigated the treacherous terrain, dodging falling debris and avoiding patrols of smaller hybrids. The closer they got to the central organism, the stronger the whispers became, a cacophony of voices urging them to stop, to surrender, to join the harmony. "You hear them too, don't you?" Raj asked quietly, his voice strained. Sophie nodded, forcing herself to focus. "Don't listen. Keep moving." Finally, they reached the base of the organism. Its tendrils writhed menacingly, sensing their presence. Sophie attached the final canister of the compound to a portable emitter, programming it to release the substance in a concentrated burst. As she worked, the ground beneath them quaked violently, signaling that the organism had detected their intrusion. "We're out of time," Raj warned, glancing nervously at the approaching hybrids. "Almost done," Sophie muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. With a final adjustment, she activated the emitter and stepped back. "Go! Now!" They sprinted toward the exit point, narrowly avoiding a tendril that lashed out at them like a whip. Behind them, the compound began taking effect, causing the organism's lattice structure to crackle with unstable energy. The entire cavern shook as the bioelectric network destabilized, sending shockwaves rippling outward. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed through the chamber, not from the organism, but from Elena. Sophie turned just in time to see her teammate collapse under the weight of a hybrid creature. Without hesitation, she doubled back, firing wildly to drive the attacker away. "Get up!" Sophie shouted, grabbing Elena's arm and pulling her to her feet. Blood trickled from a gash on Elena's forehead, but she managed a weak nod, leaning heavily on Sophie as they stumbled towards safety. By the time they reached the rendezvous point, the cavern was collapsing around them. Massive chunks of crystal rained down, crushing anything in their path. The team regrouped near the entrance, battered but alive. Sophie activated the emergency beacon, signaling the EOS for extraction. "Hold on!" she yelled as the ship descended, its engines kicking up clouds of spores. The drop pod doors opened, and the survivors piled inside, gasping for breath as the vessel ascended rapidly. Below them, the cavern imploded, consumed by a cascade of blinding light. For a moment, the planet seemed eerily silent. Then, slowly, the bioluminescent rivers resumed their gentle glow, and the crystalline trees stood tall once more. Had they succeeded, or merely delayed the inevitable? Back aboard the EOS Dash, the mood was somber yet tinged with cautious optimism. The survivors gathered in the common area, nursing wounds both physical and emotional. Sophie addressed them briefly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her features. "We did what we came here to do," she said firmly. "But this isn't the end. The Synod may be weakened, but it's not gone. We've bought ourselves time, but only if we use it wisely." Raj and Elena immediately set to work analyzing data collected during the mission, searching for any signs of residual activity on Taro. Initial readings suggested the bioelectric signals had diminished significantly, but neither scientist dared declare victory prematurely. In private, Sophie reflected on the cost of their survival. Lives lost, friendships shattered, trust eroded, and yet, Amidst the devastation, there was hope, a fragile, flickering flame that refused to be extinguished. Humanity had faced extinction and emerged battered but unbroken. As the Eos charted a course away from Taro, Sophie stood alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there lay answers, perhaps even allies willing to help them prepare for whatever came next. Until then, she vowed to protect her people, to ensure that no matter how dark the odds became, they would never lose sight of who they were. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Sophie Duran was ready. Together, they would face whatever horrors awaited in the vast expanse of space. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling adventure. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe for more epic tales of courage, survival, and the resilience of the human spirit.